how do you start to roll out roles and confirmation practices across an organization? In this podcast, Jen explains what she's doing, how it's working, and the difference that it's making. Hi, Jen. Please, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, Helen. So my name's Jen Gardner, and I'm one of the associate directors for the Stroke Association. So I report into our executive director team, and I oversee all our service delivery, our engagement work, and I, within my role, work as a systems leader for the whole of the northwest of England.
Thank you. When did you first hear about roles and confirmation practices, Jen?
And it was actually when I was struggling in my own role. It's a fairly new role for the organisation, and I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And I spoke to a colleague, Sam, who had done some work with roles and confirmation practices, and she felt it would help me get some clarity. So that was really my first introduction to it, and it made me realise that this could be something that was really useful for other staff within my team.
Thank you. And what was it about roles, getting really clear about roles, as you said, and then using confirmation practices to reflect on how you feel you're doing? What was it about that that felt interesting or intriguing or potentially beneficial to you?
So I think it was firstly the way that it added a bit of clarity, which really helped with those feelings of being overwhelmed as to what I focus on.
Mm-hmm.
But it also really enabled me to focus in on what I was supposed to be, what my actual role was. I know that sounds, but as opposed to a list of descriptors or a list of responsibilities, what I was supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and then having the framework to reflect on the areas that I felt I was doing well at, or the areas that I needed to improve, again enabled me to really focus in on where I needed to place my energy. And I think that was what helped me. It was that clarity and focus for me.
Thank you. And you said it's a new role, presumably with a job description. So how do you see the description of roles and the metrics and other information around that as different to a sort of job description?
So for me, the job description is almost a list of tasks and responsibilities, whereas the roles help you to see what you should actually be doing in your job.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it's set out on the framework helps you to understand, obviously, the why you're doing it. So I do this because, so that, and it also helps you to articulate how you do it. So to really think around, what's my role? How do I do it? And then having the what am I doing? How will I know when I'm doing it well? Again, as opposed to just a list of either responsibilities or tasks, it really helps you to visualize and understand what you're doing, how you know you when you're doing it well, and that makes it easier for you then to sort of reflect on, well, am I doing it, and am I doing it well?
Thank you. And before you started using roles and confirmation practices, how did you know how you were getting on in your role, like your previous role, perhaps?
Um, if I'm honest, it was really difficult to know
Mm-hmm.
that. So obviously we have one-to-ones with line managers, and we do 360 feedback to understand from people, their feedback on how we're doing within our roles, but without any form of what good looks like or anything to compare it to. It was just sort of more generalized feedback and not about the specific elements of the role. So I think I found it a lot more difficult
Mm-hmm.
to know whether or not I was doing a good job. So again, that's probably another thing that I found really helpful with it.
That's great. And where are you going with them now? Because I know that you've started using them yourself, but there's a bigger plan in action at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, so obviously originally in one of the areas of the organisation, my equivalent used it with her direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
In the Northwest, our service delivery leads, so they're my direct reports, are starting to use them with their coaches. So that's a lot. it's a level down and it's a much bigger team. So there's altogether, so we're doing it in both the Northwest and the Northeast. There's 5 service delivery leads, and they oversee 11 coaches, and they're using the confirmation practices between them. And then in another team, one of the coaches is using it with their direct reports, which are our coordinators. So what we're able to get a whole lot of insight around is how this works at different levels and on a much bigger scale than the initial experiments that we did.
That's great. You're right. Much, much bigger. But you're not just sending people on a training course to learn about roles and confirmation practices, are you? How are you introducing it to the team? How did you explain to them what this is and what it was going to mean to them?
Yeah, so the first thing I did, as I say, Samantha and Hannah, who'd been introduced to using these and were using these, I invited them to one of our team meetings just to say how it had helped them in their role, how they'd experienced them, and what they'd got from them. And one of the things that we were hearing a lot from our team, we're a fairly new leadership team, was this lack of clarity about knowing when I'm doing my job well. And they were really bought in, having heard Hannah and Sam, who spoke very openly about the fact that it also is quite challenging at first to reflect on, areas and really sort of self-reflect. You're going to come up with areas that you feel inadequate in. But even with that sort of real honesty about the fact that it takes time and that it can be quite a difficult process, the team were really bought into it. So then we went through quite a process with yourself, obviously, Helen, where we transferred the role, the job description into roles. And that was quite a collaborative process as well, because you sort of started us off with translating it into the roles document. But then there was an opportunity with the leads to look at that, and then with all of the coaches to look at it, because it was their role that we were doing. It was the coach role. And that really gave them then the chance to reflect on, did they feel that reflected their role? Did they have questions about it? And then we slowly introduced it through. So obviously I watched yourself delivering a presentation to our leads about confirmation practices and about how we use them, and then talking through the roles. And then I did that with the teams in 2 sessions so that it was introduced. And on that, it was really helpful before I gave that session, obviously, to go through with you some of the questions we might get, some of the areas that people might find more challenging. And it's fair to say that people had a lot of questions, and there was definitely some anxiety around it. But by doing it in that way, and doing it rather than a sort of just a one-day training course, but a conversation, if you will, then people were able to really see how it could help, to get the understanding and to take ownership for it, because they'd really played a part in making sure that we'd got the descriptors right for the roles.
You're right. It's a very rigorous process. When you said inadequate earlier, it's like a punch to the stomach for me. I'm obviously brought up with CQC, and a rating of inadequate used to be the most dreadful thing that you could imagine. So to reflect on your role and not feel like you're doing it well can feel very challenging and very difficult, as well as an opportunity to think about how you want to improve. What were some of the anxieties or concerns as you started to get going from different groups of people?
Yeah, so I think one of the main anxieties was around how this fits in with the other ways that we currently work with our organisation. So we're introducing new systems to be able to document our one-to-ones. We already have some sort of templates for one-to-ones. How would it fit in with that? Was it going to be extra? I think the sort of the time, even just the time to come and be introduced to them, and then the time, because the way that we've done it is obviously our leads have watched you demonstrating it with one of their coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've watched our leads trying it with one of our coaches and giving feedback. So even just those steps to sort of, in busy roles, carve the time out. And I think that it just felt a very new way of doing things for people, which any change or anything new can feel quite challenging. I think it also uncovered for us areas that we organisationally may need to look at. So when we were going through the roles, things that were believed to be part of the role that people would understand as part of the role, it did bring up quite a few questions, which we then obviously have needed to look into and help people with clarity around that as well. So lots of newness, and the main concern around that sort of that time of doing something new. But I think as we've worked through it, people have seen we've spent a lot of time talking about the why. Why are we doing this? What will it help us to achieve? And we've also spent time making it part of a process and not a big add-on to what they already do. So actually, the current one-to-ones are very different now, but we've not added in an extra, taken more time. We've just changed how we do it.
So you've added confirmation practices into the existing one-to-one structure. So you both have some of the elements of the way you'd been doing it before, and introduced confirmation practices into that. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And we were already, as a locality, looking at how we meet. So we've tried to take some of the operational elements of one-to-ones out of the one-to-ones.
Mm-hmm.
A bit of a reflection that maybe that wasn't the best place for them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's being taken out of that. And as you say, then we've got the confirmation practices, but then the rest of the one-to-one that we would have gone through anyway.
And I understand that there's a strong focus on cultural change in your organization. How do you think that looking at roles in the way that you're doing and adding confirmation practices as a way of reflecting on the roles aligns with the sort of broader cultural change that you're experiencing?
Yeah, well, we want to move really to a culture of trust and empowerment, where people take accountability within their roles. And we also want to use a coaching first way of working, where we're able to unlock people's potential and help them to maximize their own performance. And I think through the process of confirmation practices, where people are able to reflect on their own performance, but then use a coaching approach to take that into action, and what they'll do really puts that responsibility for their role with them and for their development with them, and sort of enables that empowerment that we were hoping to get to, and that autonomy. And I think using the coaching cards has really got us into a coaching mentality of how we work through a problem using that approach. It's going to be a long journey. I know our probably traditional style has been to try and fix or rescue, and actually using coaching is going to feel very different for a long time. But using this process, using a sort of a structured way of doing it initially, has really helped people to see how the coaching conversation can help people to find their own solutions and move to action on that.
I know it's interesting talking about a card, isn't it? When it's something that I put up on the screen that we that we used, that was developed with Andy Brogan and has 3 sections. But as you say, it's literally just a series of questions that help people identify which element of their role they want to focus on after giving themselves a score, how that score might be having a wider impact on other people as well, what success would look like, what would giving yourself 5 look like, and then asking people to imagine what kind of ideas they've got to move towards 5, and then taking those ideas forward. So, and I think it's usually taken us about 20 to 30 minutes to coach and support people to do that. What has been happening with the actions from that? Because from my recollection, these actions were things that you'd be doing next week or in 2 weeks' time. How have you kept a track on those, and what have you noticed?
Yeah, so what we've been encouraging the staff to do, we have we work a lot on Microsoft Teams,
Mm-hmm.
and within that channel we have a development area that we've got a specific channel for our development as a team. And what the staff have been doing is they've been documenting on that channel that all the team can see what action they're working on, so what they've identified and the action that they're working on. And that enables everybody to give encouragement, but again, it enables them to sort of, by putting it out there, really take action on it themselves, and be accountable for it. So there's that openness, that transparency, which is obviously giving other people confidence to put their own on there. But there's also the group support and the fact that it's more accountable for moving things forward, because we can see what you've said you'll do, and there's that sort of then that record of it to come back to at the next one-to-one.
And in your role, Jen, would you usually be aware of what people were committing to in their one-to-ones, or what their development goals were? What difference has that made to you?
It's very different. So no, I wouldn't be aware. And I think one of the biggest things about that for me is it's really enabled me to have an oversight of the areas and see any themes that are developing around the particular role that people are pulling out that they want to develop on. For example, a couple of people have mentioned around the role of living our values, and that is enabled me to see that might be an area that we need to focus on in relation to supporting our teams more about understanding our values and the behaviours accepted. And I also feel that for me, it's enabled me to really encourage the teams, and open myself out if there's an area that they want to sort of come to me on. So it's probably increased my connection with staff that I wouldn't normally have any sort of part in their development.
And have there been any surprises? What has struck you as surprising, different, or unusual from your experience so far? I know that we're not very far into it yet, but have there been any surprises?
And I think the first surprise was how much the coaches have really valued the clarity in their role. It's almost like a collective sigh of relief, that there was obviously uncertainty for them at that level around exactly what their role should be, exactly what they should be doing and what that should look like. And actually having introduced these, the unanimous feedback is, I really like this. This is really helping me to understand what my role is, what's expected of me, and to really focus my own development. So I think I was surprised that, given that it is something new and something extra and all the anxieties that came, how sort of excited they are about this new way of working and how really bought into them. And I think, as I mentioned before, it's a surprise for me is some of the areas that I thought our teams were clear on, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they aren't as clear as we thought they were. So again, that's both been surprising but incredibly helpful to understand, and that isn't something that they're clear on, and that's something then that we can work on.
Thank you. And anything else that you've noticed from seeing what people are focusing on? You mentioned that a couple of people wanted to look at how they were living their values, which was part of modeling that within their role. And anything else that stands out?
And yeah, another area that's come through is around objective setting,
Mm-hmm.
understanding personal objectives, that then being able to help others with their objectives. And I think that's something, again, as we move our culture, we've sort of, in the hope of sort of moving to a more self-managing, more autonomous culture, have reflected on whether we've given people enough direction. So we don't want to be directive, but have they got enough direction to understand, and have they got a good enough understanding of where they fit in that sort of our overall vision for the organization? So I think that's been really helpful for me to see, and helpful for us to then use that to give them the tools that they need before to sort of create their own objectives, understanding the bigger picture. So I think that's been a really helpful area as well, and something possibly we take for granted that everybody just knows how to do that. So it's been great to understand that that's an area we can provide perhaps a bit more support around.
I love that, being able to see the threads of potential learning and development opportunities for colleagues right back to their roles, rather than a general, what do people need to know next, and also linking it to strategic thinking about values and how you're living your values as an organization. I mean, given what you've experienced, and it is early days still, what do you think are the main benefits to getting this clear about roles, and then, rather than just expecting a manager to give you feedback on your performance, looking at your own reflections on how well you're doing and how confident you feel in your role through confirmation practices?
I think it goes back to that taking the autonomy and taking responsibility within your roles. I think by giving them this framework and by using the coaching approach, people are finding, we're unleashing their own potential, and you can see that in people. There's a real ownership, and using self-reflection as opposed to a manager coming in and telling you, giving you feedback. Actually helping people to reflect on their own role means that they're really bought into the actions that they need to do to improve on that role. And so I think we're the other side of it that we're seeing, I think, is around personal development not being a thing that happens once a year when you have an annual review, or something that when you're told you're doing something wrong, that's when you need to look at your development. It's a continuum of continuously developing within their role. But whilst we've talked a lot about that in the past, seeing a big difference about people really wanting to develop in their role now that they've got a method to be able to reflect and then create action. So I think that that's a big change, that it's not seen as a separate thing that you do. It's sort of seen as within our roles, we're all continuously doing that by using this practice.
Thank you. That's been fascinating, especially the connection to the wider themes of personal growth and development, of culture development, and also linking to learning and development too. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Jen.
Not at all. Thank you, Helen.